Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today, we are having conversation 2, Stand By Me, Allyship and Intersectionality, which is put on by Infosys iBelieve Employee Resource Group Council. And joining us are all of our Employee Resource Group chairs or co-chairs, as well as guest speakers. My name is Sandra Jackson, and I'm really happy to be here today with all of you to share in this important dialogue and discussion. I am head of workforce diversity and EEO at Infosys Americas, and I am happy to be joined by our great moderator, Shannon Hart, who is the communication lead for Infosys Knowledge Institute. And Shannon is going to take us through a series of dialogues and questions on this important topic. So with that said, over to you, Shannon.
Thanks, Sandra. As Sandra said, my name is Shannon Hart. I'm the communications lead with the Infosys Knowledge Institute. That is the research and thought leadership arm of the company. And this is the second panel discussion in a 4-part series called Erase. And during this time, we're having serious dialogues about races, biases, and inclusions. And this is all hosted by iBelieve. Now, we are so excited because all Infosys ERGs are partnering for this conversation. So without further ado, I want to introduce our esteemed panel. And this is in no specific order, but I want everyone to know different faces that represent the different groups here at Infosys. I want to start with Deontay Durham. He's an Infosys Senior Legal Counsel for Americas. He is with iBelieve, Infosys Black Employees Leading in Excellence, Vision, and Equity. Next, we have Linda Gossage, Infosys AVP Global Alliances. She is representing iWin, Infosys Women's Inclusivity Network. And then Aaron Clark, Chief of Staff of Infosys Consulting, is representing iPride today. And Sam Riga, he's the lead human resources business partner for Infosys, and he is representing Young Employee Network. The multicultural ERG is being represented by Todd Craighead. He's the senior principal in the Infosys Consulting Group. And last but not least, a man who has also been a civil rights attorney, Anurag Barma, is head of global government and public affairs for Infosys. Welcome to our Rockstar panel. Thank you all for being with us today. And thank you for being willing to discuss a subject that can sometimes be a bit uncomfortable. We are talking allyship here today, specifically with iBelieve. Now, exactly what does that mean to be an ally? And how can you be a good ally? Well, that's a great question, and here's some answers in this video. Now, before we get started, this is going to be a great conversation, and I know you will have a number of questions throughout the conversation. Here is what we're going to ask everyone to do. Save your questions. We'll have a Q&A at the end of the panel. Go ahead and place your questions to the right in the chat box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the discussion, okay? All right, well, let's get to this. Anurag, because you have been a civil rights attorney, I'm going to let you kick off the entire conversation by talking about what is an ally? What do you see as an ally?
Well, thank you, Shannon. Thanks for having me be a part of this discussion. I was kind of counting on the video because I saw the video yesterday and it's really great, but let me do my best. An ally requires a few different things, to me. One is it is somebody who identifies the struggles of others, someone who takes the time to understand the difference between her or his own life and lived experience and that of those that they're looking to be an ally of. It's understanding what I have that can help the struggles, but at the same time, understanding what I do on a daily basis that may perpetuate the struggle. The easiest thing is an ally takes action and does not stay silent. And also, at their very core, they understand that there's no pat on the back for doing the right thing.
I like that, no pat on the back. So how do you start to become an ally? I'm going to direct that question to Linda because As a woman, I'm sure you have to be an ally with a number of different people. So how do we start to become an ally for others?
Anurag, thank you for that very insightful kickoff. I think the very first thing that we all have to do as individuals before we can even say we're an ally. And by the way, being an ally is a label that you earn. It's not one that you just give yourself, right? So first and foremost, take a look at yourself. Do you have a seat at the table? Who else is at that table? I didn't always have a seat at that table, so I had to start off by being an ally for myself first. And you can do that for yourself and put you in a position to be an ally for somebody else, you're not going to be effective. And to Anurag's point, being an ally is all about action, right? So you can't act until you're credible. And so you have to educate yourself, right? Educate yourself on what brought us to where we are today. The history of I like to call them underappreciated groups, right? The history of those underappreciated groups and how we got to the position where we are. And then lean on your own experiences, right? That's tremendous credibility when you can share your own experiences with others as well and take the appropriate actions. So become that scholar and then become a confidant, right? Build that trust through your credibility with those teams that you want to help lift up and be their confidant. Listen to them, let them be a safe space where they can share their experiences with you without interjecting your own experiences, right? So that's just my view on some of the steps that we can take on how to become an ally.
Great information there, Linda. Confidant, ally for self. If you do not have pencil and paper and you aren't taking a few notes, I would suggest that you do, because you will hear language in here that will definitely ring in every part of your life and for everyone, I think, that is here today. So make sure you're taking a few notes for yourself. And speaking of language, what about positive language, Erin?
Right.
What is positive language for allies?
The very core first is realizing that language has power, and the words that you use when talking about those for whom you want to be an ally, the words that you choose have meaning to people, and sometimes the meaning can be attributed differently to different people. So it's sort of an understanding of what. Knowing that what you say matters, and knowing that how you were describing and how you were talking about situations and people and events and whatnot, can come off in a different way depending on what language you're choosing to use. So choosing your words carefully and making sure that that you are speaking about things using words that have positive connotation. Sometimes we can inadvertently use a word that can mean something negative, with different people's backgrounds. That also just mentioning, or just wanted to mention that sometimes, how you listen is even more important than what you're saying. So making sure that you're listening to those for who you're being an ally, and you're using some of that same language when you're talking to other people who, may be trying to understand, who maybe need to be educated. That you're using some of the same language and ways to describe experiences that you have heard, the people for whom you're being an ally.
Erin, it's so interesting that you said language is power for people. I'll just say I have a 5-year-old and I have to remind him all the time, your words have power behind them. Don't call names. Make sure, you're saying things, if someone says it to you, that you're okay with them saying that. So if they say you're short because he's not real tall right now, are you okay, with whatever is being said? So I think you are right on point with that. Language is power. And Deontay, I'm going to come to you on this question. How can an ally show support both verbally and through actions? Walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for allowing me to be a part of this. Shannon, I think that's a great question. And you know what, to answer that, I want to kind of tie in, everything that everybody's been saying. Everything has been phenomenal so far. You know what, for me, I think before you can even start to provide any type of support, verbal or through action, you have to recognize that there is an issue, right? You have to recognize that there is an imbalance, right? Because you can't effectuate any change without recognizing that there is an imbalance, right? It's somebody who is more privileged, right? Recognizing, the person who is next to you or versus the person who maybe should be next to you, right? And so kind of tying into what Aaron said and what you said with regards to words having power, right? The one thing you don't want to do is cause any harm, right? You think about, for instance, I've seen a lot of things with like the Black Lives Matter movement and, how people will misinterpret the point of the Black Lives Matter movement or, its vision or its purpose. And so if someone's trying to step up to be an ally, not really understanding what that is, you're actually doing more harm than good, right? And so it's important to really kind of understand and do your due diligence, do your research before you can actually try to effectuate any type of change. One's heart may be good, but they may not realize that they're actually doing more harm than good. And so, it's the simple things, right? Asking me, how do you pronounce your name correctly, right? Those are some of the simple things that you want to think about. Maybe if you are, more seasoned in a company, try being a mentor, right? And helping someone to bring them up so they'll know how to, like Linda was saying, you have to get a seat at the table, right? So knowing how to advocate for yourself. So I think it starts there. It starts with the due diligence phase first before you can even start to show some type of support.
Okay, Deontay said a lot of great things, like starting with how do you pronounce a person's name? And I will tell you, as a former journalist, number one thing you do, what is your name? Even if it looks like it's the normal spelling of Brian or Susan, it's still okay to ask, because that shows that you care and it shows that person is important, right? So before we continue with our conversation, we had a video and I want everyone to take a look at it because it really is talking about allyship. What does it mean? So I want us to roll the video so that we can continue with this conversation.
What is an ally? Well, to me, an ally is a performative support system for those that are disenfranchised. They're people that stand by you.
1, respect us. Help us with resources. Stand up for us. Speak up. Teach your children about racism.
A good ally is someone who can advocate your best interests without you being present. They have an interest in your success or wishes being fulfilled, and they definitely see your value.
To me, an ally is a good friend. There is someone that is there for you when you need them, even if you don't know it.
A good ally never takes breaks. They're continuously learning, listening, and understanding how they can improve the lives of disenfranchised groups.
A good ally is someone who is aligned with you in support of a common purpose, someone who is willing to stand side by side with you in defense of that common purpose.
Now, those are a number of our ERG members throughout the company, and you hear what they're saying when it comes to allyship. It really does encompass everything that Anurag, Linda, Aaron, and Deontay have already been saying, that allyship is not a thing. It's basically a way of life. It's a way that you are brought up, part of your moral fiber, as I like to say. So, Todd, I want to get you to jump right into this conversation and talk about how can we live into allyship.
Sure. Thank you very much, Shannon. Thanks to Nicole. So as you said, we've heard a lot of great comments already about what allyship looks like from the video, from earlier panelists. let me just add a couple other dimensions to that. And I'll use the analogy of, in this day and age where we've got social media, there's a big difference still between Facebook friends and true friends. And so what I would say in terms of allyship, as we've already alluded to, it is certainly more about action than just words. So it's not about doing, and saying something that you are expected to say at that given point in time because it's the popular thing to do or it's expected of you, whether it's you're an individual or a leader. But it's certainly a focus and bias toward action, the right actions in terms of listening, providing support. And I'd go so far to say it's really even more than just actions. It's about sustained action. It's about having an ongoing dialogue, similar to what we're putting forth today, ongoing to talk about where things are and what we can do to help with the situation.
So I'm just going to say this is probably an ongoing conversation with the multicultural ERG.
No doubt, it certainly is.
Aaron, I know it's an ongoing conversation with all of our ERGs. So let's talk about education. Where can allies seek education?
Great question. Earlier Deontay mentioned that it's important for people to educate themselves. And I think it's important, that phrasing is important because it really is incumbent upon me and other folks who are allies to educate themselves first, or do what they can first before, expecting the group, the disenfranchised people to have to educate them, right? I've heard from many friends, it becomes exhausting. There are a lot of resources out there. And I think one of the, great things that's come out of the subject is that people have realized that maybe, there were a lot of great resources, but they weren't packaged up nicely for people to find them easily. And now they are. So a quick internet search is, number one. Also, your library. I've, really gotten to know my public library really well recently. I don't know about y'all, but, there are so many great books, historical fiction, biography, that can help you, learn what other people have been going through. I'm reading The Warmth of Other Suns right now, and it's just really eye-opening to think about history in a different context than maybe what I was taught in school or what my ancestors experienced. To really put a different perspective and bring more empathy to discussions that I'm having with friends and colleagues. So those are, just a couple of places or a couple of things you can go to, but I'm sure we can also send out maybe some links to, some reading lists or good podcasts. That's another thing that I've found is that there are so many podcasts out there where you can just, hear other people talking about what's going on today in their world and why things are important to them, why this election is so important to some people. So anyway, point is that there are a lot of resources for us to educate ourselves first. And then, of course, be able to come educated to discussions with your friends and colleagues about what you've learned, and maybe you want to get their own, their personal perspectives on things. You can have a more enriched conversation that way by coming prepared.
Erin, can you remind everybody what book you said you're reading right now?
Yeah, sure. It's called The Warmth of Other Suns. I can look up the author, but it is talking about the sort of most recent Great Migration out of the South for African Americans who were enslaved into other parts of the United States primarily. Really talking about the migration that happened over, I think it was about 50 years, maybe a little bit longer. That because it happened sort of so slowly and progressively over time, people didn't necessarily consider it a migration at the time. But now we're looking back on it and looking at it from a historical perspective and saying, that really was one of the big great migrations of our time. And now you can look into what drove it, what decisions people had to make in terms of where they went and why they went. Anyway, it's been a really good book.
Isabel Wilkerson's the author. Sorry, I saw that in the chat there. Rosalind, thank you very much for putting that in there.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I was going to repeat that, Warmth of Other Suns. So if you're paying attention, if you're on this panel with us, make sure you have pen and paper, because these panelists are going to be giving you some great tips, great information, great resources. And that takes me to Linda. I'm going to just go to you next. How do allies turn what they're learning into action? Because it's great to read these books or magazine articles, but how do you turn that into something that's usable beyond just reading a book?
Right. That's a very long answer. So I'm gonna categorize it in two pieces, right? So I think, from a corporate perspective, the way we address that and the way we put that in action is to formalize our strategy around that, right? So as an example, when I am interviewing for a role on the team, I make sure that I have a well-represented, diverse pool of candidates to choose from. And I will not interview anybody until I have that well-diversified pool of candidates. So things like that from a corporate perspective, work with your leadership team to have, annual or semi-annual reviews, audits. Why are people leaving? Do we have pay equity, right? What does our diverse landscape look like? And from a more informal perspective, right, it's really about the one-on-one relationships that we have. So let me think of an example. Make it, give people a forum to speak for themselves, right? So many times I find that, we're in a meeting or we're at a party, right? Some type of social situation, and we've got a subject matter expert right next to us that's not given the opportunity to speak, right? So open up that opportunity. Hey, Deontay, I know you were really involved in that. I know you studied that in school or something, right? And share with us your experiences, right? So open up that door for people that you see who are being underrepresented, the opportunity to show, right, their value, what they do, right, who they are. Those are the two areas that I can think of right off the top of my head. Yeah.
Maybe conversations like this.
Yeah, conversations like this, right? Exactly. And sometimes I feel, like I said, I didn't always have a seat at the table, right? I had to kind of weasel myself in. There comes a point where it is valuable, right? Earlier I said, listen openly without sharing your own experience, right? Because we want to make sure that person's 100% validated when we are being their confidant. But there comes a point where you get into a relationship where you show your vulnerabilities and, what your experiences have been. And I just think that builds the whole ecosystem of how we can support each other. And I think it's going to be interesting when we get into the intersectionality piece of this, because that's what I'm kind of going towards right now. But yeah.
Okay. So Sam, I want you to just jump in here because we don't want to leave you out. Talk to us a little bit, just kind of piggyback on what Linda was just saying. How does inequality even manifest in the workplace? Because I've heard her say several times, I had to kind of wiggle my way into, that seat at the table.
Yeah. Thank you, Shannon. And I think, I guess to answer that question about how does inequality manifest in the workplace, I think just the way that my brain works, I think I'd like to first start by talking about how we can remove inequality in the workplace. And so I think just as a first step, like many of our panelists have already mentioned already, I think the very first step is to create a platform that does promote the understanding that it does exist. And so once there is this general awareness and acceptance that inequality does in fact exist in our workplace, I do think the next step from there is just to take the time to learn the many ways that we may knowingly or even unknowingly contribute to or even experience this problem. And I think from there, something to keep in mind is that not everyone has the same story to tell. And as not just working professionals at Infosys, but just as people, it is our duty to understand the various ways that people have been impacted because of their race, their gender, their age, and their sexual orientation, etc. And then we use that knowledge to find the best path forward in creating an equal and inclusive culture in just our world. So the reason I kind of began with this is because I do feel like the manifestation of inequality in the workplace does come from this lack of awareness, this lack of understanding, and a lack of action in a particular company's culture. Through my experiences, I have worked at companies where diversity-driven initiatives, unfortunately, they've just been done as sort of a checklist item, where companies are just putting pen to paper, checking that box, and saying, "Great, we can say that we did this. We've covered our backs." But fortunately, something that I've seen at Infosys, and I know I've only been here for about 2 years, but something that I've really been able to see firsthand is that as a company, we do take a tremendous effort to really embed the importance of a culture that really does embrace diversity as one of its biggest strengths, and arguably its biggest strength. And just to use an example too, I think using our ERGs as that example, our ERGs have been a very powerful platform for us to not only create a sense of belonging for a variety of employees, and hopefully all of our employees to some extent, but they've also been a catalyst for a lot of positive actions and changes. And we've seen that through alterations to things like company policy, as an example. And kind of like what you were saying before, Shannon, even a discussion like today, I think the impact that something like this has, it's truly remarkable.
I like that, and I think you're right. When they become more aware, then that's when you know that their brains are open to learning something new, or to just be better informed. So a great part of this conversation, but I want to also continue our discussion by talking about intersectionality. Some of you may be saying, what exactly is that, and what does it have to do with allyship? We have some answers in this video.
My definition is that it's the sum of all the parts that make up who we are as individuals, but also who we are collectively as a group or a community. Those parts that we may think of as just a little of this and a little of that, they play a big role in how we are seen and treated and represented within society.
Intersectionality is all of me. It's acknowledging my full identity, whether it be race, class, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation. You're basically acknowledging everything that someone has to offer.
Intersectionality can include culture, race, ethnicity, class, gender, identity, age, language, and other identifying traits. But to me, intersectionality is how you may feel or how you are perceived by others based on the impact of these traits over time.
It's having the difficult discussion around the systematic systems that oppress not just Blacks, but any group deemed as less worthy, and removing them. However, the first step is recognition.
Honestly, a lot. So I just consider it like this. Everyone has their own views and experiences when it comes to discrimination and oppression. So honestly, we just have to consider anything and everything that can be used to marginalize us as a people.
That video was packed with lots of great information, all true. But Deontay, you're an attorney, so tell us, what is intersectionality and where do you see it coming from?
Yeah, you know that. So you're right, Shannon. Those videos were pretty packed. Those are some really smart, intelligent people. And so, you know, and they defined it really well, you know, and that's really kind of just what it is. I think with intersectionality, it's kind of a theory, right? You think of the underrepresented groups and the different forms of oppression that are out there that affect those underrepresented groups. But what happens when you have someone who is made up of multiple underrepresented groups, right? And so that's what you think about when you think about intersectionality, right? And so I know intersectionality was coined from the Black feminist movement. It came from a Black female scholar by the name of Kimberly Crenshaw. And the way she came up with that was she felt that legislation that was geared towards that was framed towards racism was more so to effectuate change for Black men, right? And then legislation that was framed more so towards gender was for white women. So it was, what about if I'm a Black woman, right? Or what if I am a Black gay woman? What happens then, right? And so that's what you think about in terms of intersectionality. If you're in multiple underrepresented groups, how do you deal with multiple forms of oppression that are coming your way?
Okay, so Aaron, do you want to add on to what Deontay said? And that was a lot, including the video. So do you want to add a little bit more information as to what intersectionality is?
I mean, I'll just give my own perspective, which is, the word obviously comes from intersection. There are a lot of different pieces and parts that make up each one of us as individuals. And so I think the big takeaway is, we all come with our own experiences and ways that we see the world, but also the ways that perhaps others see us. And I think the important thing is to see, as allies, to come into conversations realizing and recognizing that we can't assume that anybody is going to think or believe something a certain way because of what they look like, or because of what their accent is, or because they came from a certain place. So it's really just the importance of understanding that we all come with our own story and our own perspectives that are not immediately obvious by having a preliminary conversation. So it's that importance of developing empathy through understanding and listening.
So Sam, I know earlier you kind of touched a little bit on this. Why is adopting an intersectional approach, why is that beneficial in the workplace or in regular life, just everyday life?
Yeah, it's a great question, and my opinion, I think from an overall adoption perspective of this intersectional approach, I do think it's beneficial because, as Deontay was kind of describing, this really helps us see past those very oversimplified notions that all people who fall under a particular, maybe a single category of identity, experience the same forms of discrimination. So with this type of approach, it helps us understand these overlapping identities, the types of prejudices or oppression that they may have experienced. And from that level, we are able to understand the problem, and hopefully this will only strengthen our efforts in combating it. And something that I kind of referenced before, but just from a professional standpoint, this is very important information for us to be able to use and leverage, and use that knowledge to really understand and work towards that equal playing field that, I know that we may have made some improvements over the number of years, but we're certainly not there. We're not even close to the finish line. And so having an intersectional approach, it really helps us kind of target our path forward, and hopefully we can get there where everyone truly feels and experiences that they are equal to their peers.
Are equal to their peers. Good thought. Todd, I want you to talk to me a little bit about this next question. How can you use your power, because you're in the consulting leg of the company, how can you use your power or influence to elevate the voices of the Black community?
So there's a lot of parts to this question, by all means. I want to tie back a little bit to the notion of intersectionality. So for me, it's been an evolution. When I started my career, bringing your whole self to work was certainly not encouraged, and probably so as a result, we maybe were more likely to put people in buckets and view at certain things. So as I've evolved over time, as my career has expanded, and we've said, hey, there's a lot of value of having a broad set of opinions and bringing all those different experiences together. And we think about that in terms of how we develop project teams. We think about it in terms of how we staff organizations in total. And the other thing, just to put my own view on the table, because I think we all have certain biases, is that by nature I'm a problem solver. So if I think about this, the whole notion of what can I do to support the Black community, I got to be cautious not to jump too quickly to what I believe are the solutions. It's going back to things we've already said before, what makes a good ally, and that is being a good listener, being supportive, understanding the range of concerns and feelings that people have on stuff, not trying to jump to a solution. And, when we're doing solution work, and we do that, on the consulting side, we try to, categorize things. We try to say, these are the 3 key factors. That doesn't really work in this. This is much more dynamic, and we definitely have to be broader and deeper in our listening and understanding.
Broader and deeper in listening and your understanding. Anurag, I'm sure that's something that you have a lot of experience as a civil rights attorney, that you had to really listen to people. So add on to what Todd is talking about. How can you use your power and influence to elevate the voices of African Americans?
Yeah, no, great question. I want to take a step back, kind of tie this to intersectionality, right? If you really think about it, intersectionality is the ultimate form of being a good ally, right? It's this idea that if I want people to understand the complexities of my life and where I come from in my daily life, well, if you want to be an ally, you need to actually go a couple layers deep, and see what the daily life is, right? So there's the macro, which is great, which is kind of reading and learning and understanding, but really it's the micro. It's kind of figuring out what the daily life looks like. So when I did this national class action discrimination lawsuit on behalf of Black farmers, right? I knew it was my job to really figure out the story and what the daily life of the Black farmer in the rural Southern farming community was like, because it was my job then to elevate that voice, right? I did it because I had access to a courtroom, right? But I also did it because I had the infrastructure of a law firm, right? I mean, there were things that I had that the farmer didn't, right? But I wouldn't be any good in terms of elevating that voice until I went 3 layers deep and figured out what the life was for that farmer, for the farmer's spouse, for the kids, the history behind it. So, that's the type of, and again, even after doing that for many, many years, I'm still not an expert, right? But I got to a point where I could do some help.
So how do you advocate for marginalized individuals or groups within your ERG? Todd, I'm going to give that one to you because you're with the multicultural ERG, and I just know enough about that ERG to know that there's so many different people from so many different areas of the world just coming into your group. So how do you advocate? I mean, Anurag told us how he advocated for those Black farmers. How do you advocate within Infosys or within the group that you're working with?
Sure. Thank you, Shannon. And certainly, I was not born into multiculturalism. People may be saying, how did this guy end up being the chair of the multicultural ERG? Born in Nashville, grew up the whole time in the South, but prior to coming to Infosys, I worked for Coca-Cola for 15 and a half years. And with Coca-Cola, I had the opportunity to travel to and work in 20 different countries on pretty much every continent. So that's what really, I grew into multiculturalism, as I tell people within our team. But fundamentally, the mission of our team is really to raise cross-cultural awareness, really helping our members better understand and celebrate other cultures. So as we think about the course of the year, our intention is to, as we get to different months that are focused on celebrating different cultures, just like recently completed Hispanic Heritage Month, which we supported, it's really an opportunity to learn more about other cultures. And back to some things we've said already, fundamentally, we believe that that's the first step of being able to advocate for other people, is to truly learn about them, understand. It's an educational process. And we certainly appreciate the differences, but through understanding differences, we can also celebrate both the differences and the similarities across cultures.
So I am pretty sure that Todd has tons of amazing stories that he can tell us about all the places that he's lived across the world. But Sam, you deal with HR, so you get an opportunity to deal with people from all across the country, all across the world. I want you to talk about that question as well. How do you advocate for marginalized individuals or groups within your ERG? Or I'm sure you've had to talk with people that may be members of other ERGs. You address that as well for us.
Yeah. So I'll start by talking about my role as an HR professional. Something that I'll probably talk about later, but a lot of times as HR professionals, we are viewed as the people that can tell you what you can and cannot do at work. And that's it, right? We're sort of this black and white policy enforcer, but a huge focus of what we do is also on an inclusive and comfortable work culture and environment for all of our employees. And I do know that anytime we speak with employees that have concerns, whether they are concerned about possible discrimination or they've had a negative impact because of how they identify, those are things that we do take incredibly seriously. So I think, again, just from the world of HR, that certainly has always been our approach, but I think even more so now. We've seen such a huge push for the importance of diversity. There's been a huge increase in the diversity initiatives that we've had. I know both Sandra and Lauren are on this call, and there's sort of a powerhouse 2-person team that have continued to drive and support employees when it comes to diversity. With regards to my ERG, so my group is a little bit different because we're brand new. We haven't had a chance to really hit the ground with too much in terms of initiatives, but our core focus as the Young Employee Network is to basically create this environment that is sustainable, it's supportive, and it's engaging for our employees of the now as well as the future. And I'm sure everyone on this call is aware that we did announce that we were committing to hire about 12,000 employees over the next few years. And if you think about that number, there's going to be a tremendous amount of diversity there. And so our goals that we have as a group, when we think about the population that we really want to truly engage, it will probably be these 12,000 employees as they start to join. And so through all of our action items and our initiatives, our objectives, we try to be as transparent as we can, not just through our council leadership, but also with all of our employees that are members. If you look at our council organization, our council setup, we have such a wide variety of diversity there too. There's not only do we have black males, white females, Indian males, Indian females, but we all come from different age groups. We come from different job levels, different social upbringings. And so through the creation of our initial objectives, we've really had an open dialogue about how will these objectives impact certain pockets of employees in our company, and how can we ensure that they feel like we really are advocating for them and we are allies for all of them. And it's certainly been an open door, policy too, in the sense that we're constantly seeking feedback from not just our ERG members, but employees who might be getting feedback, or employees who we might be seeking feedback from, who will ultimately be impacted by what we do. And I also think having the level of interaction that I have as an HR partner that allows me to talk to people one-on-one. You'd be surprised to know how many calls a day that we have in HR where employees just want to talk. And sometimes it is about a particular issue. Sometimes it's more about just recommendations for how we can change things moving forward. And so I think between the two, we've certainly tried to find a way to continue being advocates and learn how to be the best versions of allies that we can. So,
and I don't know if everyone is listening is paying attention, but what Sam said is extremely important. The young group is not just for those who are a certain age, it's for everyone. And it's also about allyship, because you want to learn, and that's how you grow, is being involved with groups and different people who teach you and make you your best, because they're going to teach you different things. You're going to learn a few new things, and that's how you become a better ally, right? So I'm going to keep the conversation going. Deontay, where are you?
I'm here.
Okay, so let's talk about power dynamics. What do you see when you hear power dynamics? What are they?
Yeah, so when I think about power dynamics, first off, you got to think about what exactly is power, right? And power really is what we know it to be. It's your, one's ability to be able to, exert influence or control over someone or some group, right? And then when you think about power dynamics, you're thinking about using said power to be able to control or affect that said relationship between that person or another group. Right now, what you do with that power and how you exert that influence, that's another conversation, right? Whether it's good or bad. But, you know, kind of tying back into what Sam and Todd and Anurag were saying, which was all phenomenal, right? And these diversity initiatives, right? It's using that power dynamics, right, in the workplace to be able to effectuate some type of change. You actually need that power. Back to what Linda was saying, right? Having a seat at the table, right? Those with a seat at the table have power. And it's how you actually utilize that power, if it's going to be good or bad, because in the workplace, the power dynamics can be in any setting, right? But especially in the workplace, they can really effectuate some type of change in a positive way if used correctly.
Okay, Deontay, before I continue on, you're representing iBelieve, but do you have to be Black to be a part and participate with the iBelieve ERG?
That's a wonderful question, Shannon, and the answer is no, absolutely not. iBelieve, just like all of the ERGs, welcomes absolutely everybody. In fact, it's wonderful when we see people who are not Black or identify as Black coming, you know, to want to become a member. Because for me, as a Black man, I always welcome understanding what someone else's perspective is about me, about the Black race. And then also it gives me the opportunity to be able to explain my situation, right? And then help to reduce stereotypes and different other things. But no, iBelieve welcomes absolutely everybody.
Okay, so Linda, I'm gonna come to you. You represent IWIN. Well, everybody is not a woman. Everyone is not going to be a woman. However, that doesn't mean you have to be a woman to be a part of this. IWIN is also open to everyone. Am I correct?
Absolutely. I am so glad that question, and it reminded me everybody's welcome, regardless of gender. Please, right? It's a great way to gain some perspectives from a different group of people that you might not have, you know, a lot of perspective around. And it reminds me of a situation where, you know, I attend a monthly Women in Technology event here in the Bay Area, in the San Francisco Bay Area. And all of a sudden, this man started showing up to every single one of our meetings. And he never said anything. He just kind of showed up and listened. And so I finally approached him one day and I said, you know, I introduced myself, you know, we spoke a little bit. Why are you here? And he said, because, you know, I want to understand from a woman's perspective, a woman in technology perspective, how I can make improvements in my own company. And so I thought that was really cool. So everybody's welcome. Please join.
Yeah, I want to make sure everyone hears that and understands with all of our ERGs, you don't have to be a specific look or feel to be a part of it, because I do want us to become allies all together. And Linda, you and I were talking about power, a seat at the table. What are the power dynamics that are at play right now, and how should they be accounted for and addressed?
Wow, I'll try not to get political.
Question, right?
I'll try not to get political, but I think, you know, I mean, it really starts at the top, right? We are so influenced from how our leaders behave from a company perspective, right? But I think each of us have our own power as well, right? So don't be a follower, be a leader. You know, for me personally, I like to, and I'm not going to call it power, I'm going to say like to use where I am in the company, where my relationships are with people, right? To really help amplify their successes. You know, if somebody has done a good job at something, make sure you are their loudspeaker for them, right? Amplify their successes, be an advocate for them. If you see that there's a person or a group of people that are not being involved in a conference or a panel and you feel that they are the most experienced, advocate for them, fight for them, make sure they're getting that seat at the table. Those are just a couple examples. And then, from a corporate perspective, when I look outside of Infosys, a lot of companies are now using their power, right, to help underserved, underprivileged, underappreciated groups of people. Microsoft has always done it. Just recently, IBM announced that they will be investing millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in minority-owned, veteran-owned business partners and startup businesses. So I think, there's a lot of ways, depending on the level of power that you have, to use it, to Deontay's point, in a good way, to really make an impact on people's lives.
So I know Linda didn't want to get political, but I think it's more social than anything, because we all have to work together. And so, Sam, I'm going to come to you and ask you, how does social context influence our perception of race, class, gender, something that I'm sure that you have to address sometimes in your role with the company?
Yeah, absolutely, Shannon. So I first and foremost, I think social context, it does set the tone for what our perceptions are of things like race, class, and gender. And I don't know, it may not be the best example, but I'll kind of compare one's perceptions to the process of building a home. So obviously, when you think about building a home, the very first step is to build a concrete foundation, which will in turn hold up the rest of the home and sort of be that initial support system. And so when I think of social context and how I relate this back to my metaphor, the different ingredients that you use to eventually make that concrete for the foundation, those are things like, where you grew up, how you grew up, what other factors played into your upbringing, what school were you a part of, social and organizational affiliations, religion, all of these different things. And so thinking back to this metaphorical house for a second, imagine building a house and you finally finish and you're living in the house. Maybe it's only been a week, maybe it's been 20 years. And you come to realize the foundation is faulty. And all of a sudden, here you are, you have to tear down the house that you worked so hard to build and basically just start over from the beginning. And so I think using that as an example, unfortunately, right where we are right now, a lot of people are tearing down their homes right now and rebuilding their foundations. And so I think in terms of social context and all those factors I previously talked about, that is what forms your perceptions. And for a lot of us that are tearing down our homes right now, we're going through that process. We're figuring out, okay, what were the missing ingredients? And maybe I need to go back and reread the instructions a little bit and thinking about that knowledge that we're gaining now, or maybe we had it and we're trying to share it with others. Not only can we address it now, but if you think about that next generation, what can we do to make sure that they can build their foundation right the very first time so that they don't have to tear down their house? And I think just that's how I've always made sense of it. But again, I think the biggest piece here is from the moment you're born, social context does set the tone for how you perceive certain factors like gender and race and class and those types of things.
I think you are onto something. I think you're right. Where you grew up, how you grew up, that all becomes a part of who you are authentically. So the question becomes, who am I? What's my full authentic identity? And I want you to listen to this video and hear what some of our ERG members had to say about that question.
Well, I'm human. By U.S. standards, I'm considered Black American. But if you peel back the layers of who I am, I'm Black, Filipino, Native American, and African.
My full authentic identity is a middle-aged white male.
I am 60% West African and 40% British Irish. I am considered higher income. However, I feel more like middle class.
Multiracial female, raised in a upper middle class environment. I still live in that environment. I was raised with two religions. Both my parents were from different religious groups. My mother was Catholic, my father was Muslim. So I was raised practicing both. And I was taught to respect both. One was not better than the other. I like to think that I'm the combination of all things good, but that also might mean all things bad. So yeah, that's my full authentic identity.
I'm Black and Blacker. I'm a millennial, American with Jamaican roots, middle working class man, and I'm a believer in Christ.
Okay, in that video, I heard people describe themselves based on their religion, their race, their age. They even talked about what they did for a living. So I thought that was very interesting when people started talking about who they are authentically. Deontay, you and I have had a number of conversations. So give me your idea of what is authenticity.
Absolutely, Shannon. You're right. And it's always a pleasure speaking with you. You know what? The members of iBelieve who are in these videos, they're phenomenal. They're making my job very easy, right? Because authenticity is exactly what they said it is, right? It's your makeup, right? It's how you see yourself, right? It's your authentic self. I have been recently trying to get more in tone with my history. I've done Ancestry DNA recently. I think it's my 23andMe. I'm doing the African heritage, and it was so cool really seeing my makeup, right? I saw Nicole in the video and she was telling us, about her makeup, and it's so cool. But it's not only just with your race, it's with everything that makes you up as a person, right? That, your work or whatever the case may be, may only be 5 or 10% of you, right? But it's your authentic self, how you see yourself, what is your makeup. But then the next step of that is, how someone sees you, right? And what is it that you portray, or how they should be receiving you. So authenticity really is just about your makeup.
Your makeup. Anurag, jump in there. What are your identities? What do you feel are your privileges, your positions of power, in relations to the issues that you're addressing?
Sure, thank you. It took me a long time to think about this question, right? Because it's so complicated, and it's complicated for all of us, right? And I think that's kind of the goal here, is that once you go through the exercise of trying to identify all the things that make you, you realize, boy, when I look at someone else, am I thinking all those things like that? I can quickly go through the list. I'm Canadian, right? I mean, that's something. But I'm a Canadian-born son of immigrants to Canada, right? And what that meant where I lived is that we were always kind of lower middle class. And all of my friends and neighbors and everyone, they were all sons and daughters of immigrants, right? So I grew up with a bunch of kids who were, Indian, African, Jamaican, West Indian. I mean, that's how I grew up, and that shaped a lot of who I was. The civil rights lawyer piece, I mean, I don't want to talk about it too much, but I did meet about 30,000 African American and American Indian farmers over a 12-year period. That shapes how I look at the world. I was one of the few non-white partners at 2 of the major international law firms. That shapes how I see the world. Lastly, you want to get to privilege. Every day I realize how privileged I am. I'm married to a woman who runs the largest racial justice organization in the Bay Area. So if I ever want to whine about hey, I'm not that privileged, I get a quick reminder about how privileged I am. But, close to this conversation, I can definitely say that many times during the work week, I feel like I'm privileged because of my Indian heritage, right? However, you take me on evenings and weekends, right? I don't always feel like I have privilege, right? So it's contextual a lot, right? And different contexts, you see the privilege, different contexts, you have trouble finding where the privilege is, right? I will tell you, many lonely a day at the large law firm, being one of the few minority partners. But to one of the points that was being made earlier, that took for me to dig deeper. If I'm feeling this way, what is the single Black female partner feeling, right, in the entire global law firm, right? Like so it's privilege, is one of those things that you really have to dig deep and figure out where it is and where you have a seat at a table that someone else doesn't. And again, that starts with digging deep on yourself, and that exercise, I think, will help in viewing others as complicated people and getting the intersectionality, which again, as I said earlier, helps make you a good ally.
So you already answered my next question for you, because I was going to ask you, have you been affected by some of the issues, some of the unconscious biases? And you said at work, everything is fine. But then when you take away what you do for a living, and people have no idea what you do, how you do it, that you have this amazing wife, obviously, it does impact you. I mean, because people still see you as a brown person at the end of the day.
Yeah, correct.
So on the opposite end of that, Sam, how about you? Talk a little bit about your identities, your privileges from where you sit, and the positions of power in the relationships to some of the issues that we're addressing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I obviously, for me, I'm a white male. My background and my heritage is a mixture of Italian, Irish, English, German, Scottish. It's sort of a weird mix. And in terms of other parts of me, I'm a millennial. I'm a member of the middle class. I am relatively religious, and so I think throughout my life, I have been very fortunate and I have been privileged. My social upbringing, I grew up in a predominantly white town, and I think, even just over the past few years, my role in all of this has been very much a learner and really trying to open my eyes as much as I can. And I think in terms of my role in whether it's through HR or a member of the ERG or even in just my community that I live in now, I definitely see the privilege that I have, and I've learned more about that over the last year than I have my previous 28 years on this earth. But I think one of the things that really comes to mind in terms of support, how I can be an ally, and do I work with people that are impacted? I see in my region, we have, and this is just one very small example, but I have a lot of employees that I support that they, some of them are gender neutral, gender fluid. Some are even currently in transition. And I think something that I've really tried to make it a point, and I learned this without knowing it, that it's so important to ask people what their preferred pronouns are. And earlier we talked about the importance of positive language and the power behind them. If you look at pronouns, they're usually no longer than 3 or so letters, and they're so incredibly powerful and they're meaningful. And so what I've learned is it's a very small step, but it's an easy step to take, where if you are meeting someone for the first time, whether it's asking them how to pronunciate their name or what are your preferred pronouns, I think that does make a huge difference. And I know that's just one very small example, but those are some of the things that I've experienced in my role as HR, and I've even tried to guide people through. I have another example of an employee who had recently transitioned, and they weren't comfortable communicating to their broader team and their leadership that they had officially transitioned. They wanted to go by a different name and they wanted to be addressed differently. And they said, I remember them coming up to me and saying, Sam, how do I do this without coming across as weird? And I remember going through that and I said, why would you use the word weird? It's not weird. And trying to learn about their feelings, and then together we kind of drafted up. Thankfully, this person had a background in communication, so they were a much better writer than some of the things I was suggesting. But we see a lot of that, and it's very important for us, especially in the world of HR, where you're kind of this reference point for a lot of people. They feel comfortable coming to you. I think it's so important that we always remain receptive to what they have to say. We try to understand it as much as we can, even if we can't place ourselves exactly in their shoes at that point in time. So I think that was just one example that really came to mind there. And yeah, hopefully that addresses your question, Shannon.
Okay, so I don't want to move on before I speak to a woman about this. Erin, can you come in, give us a little bit about your identities, your privileges, and talk a little bit, are you directly impacted by some of the issues that we're talking about here, or some of the biases that we sometimes may be unconsciously putting on a person? All right, I can come back to Erin because I do want I want to be thoughtful of everyone's time. Let's talk about negative stereotypes and how to change the narrative. Linda, I know you can address this for me. How can we disrupt that negative? Erin?
I'm back.
Oh, sorry about that. I think I
I'm
missed
so
you
sorry.
earlier. Linda, get your answer ready for that. Erin, talk to me a little bit about your own identities, your privileges, positions of powers, and also, are you directly impacted by some of the unconscious biases that, you know, we're kind of talking about here?
Well, I don't think there's anybody who isn't impacted by unconscious bias in some way. So I have to say yes. To the extent of other people, probably not. You know, if people can say, oh, you're from Atlanta, you must be a Southern girl, you must think this way and act this way and talk this way. And that's not true at all. In a lot of ways, like we moved to Atlanta just like a lot of other people. So just because I'm from here doesn't mean that my family is, for example. You know, so that's just one example of, you know, some impressions that people can have off the bat where I want to say, why would you think that? Just because of, you know, what I look like. But in terms of, you know, me being directly impacted, sure. I mean, there are assumptions that people make about me. Most of them, thankfully, are not too offensive. You know, they don't really hit me where it hurts. But I'm certainly, you know, I certainly work with people who are impacted in that way. I've got lots of friends, colleagues, even some of my son's friends. I'm starting to see as they're getting older. He's in 3rd grade. As they're getting older, sort of getting impacted, you know, by unnecessary stereotyping. So what do? I think the first thing is to just sort of take it back to, you know, the human, you know, foundation of just, you know, we're all human and we all have to think of, you know, just getting to know each other at a personal level, understanding that, back to the point about words, you know, some words can have really positive meaning and really negative meaning. So as we talk to our colleagues and friends and coworkers and and, you know, other kids, whatever, you know, choosing the words that we're using, you know, is important. And, you know, if people have questions about, you know, I don't know, that other person, you know, being kind and being able to sort of describe situations and backgrounds and what they're going through or what decisions they've made for themselves, you know, in a really sort of humane and, you know, way to help people understand, hey, we're all human here, you know, just because this person has, you know, chosen to, you know, has, you know, come out and said, you know, they're going to, you know, change identities. They want to now be called she versus he. They want to go by a different name. Doesn't mean that they're any less the person than they were before. It's just, you know, they've made this decision, for example.
So Erin, I can understand that. When I moved from Arkansas to DC, I had this amazing Southern twang. And so I do understand how people will instantly think their thought was she's not very smart, but that's okay. That's okay. You know, I've worked on it a little bit, but I'm still in the South and I'm still proud of where I am from. But speaking of negative stereotypes, real quick, Linda, how can we disrupt the negative stereotypes and change that narrative when people think, oh, she's from the South, so she's not smart?
Yeah, so that is a great question. back to let's right where the stereotypes are coming from and evaluate, are they even accurate? Right? I'll give you an example. I'm half Chinese, so everybody assumes I'm good at math. I'm terrible at math, right? I'm terrible. I need a calculator all the time. But you know, really kind of, like I said, examine, evaluate the accuracy, and change your mindset. It all starts with us as individuals, right? We have to change our mindset on how we choose to proceed when we first meet them, based on their appearances, based on their gender, and to Aaron's point, the words that we use, right? I always try to take words with a negative connotation, right? Like, again, you know, underrepresented. Let's make them underappreciated, right? So those little changes in the words that you use, I think, make a big impact. And then lastly, you know, how do we overcome some of this? And Deontay, I'm going to lean on you a little bit here, is to also get that person's perspective on how they feel, right, about how others perceive them because of their appearances or their accent or where they're from.
So Deontay, pick that up from there. What are some actions that people can take to further
remove?
What can we do to not further the contributions to marginalizing the Black community?
Absolutely. You know what? I think you take them head on, right? That's the biggest thing. You take them head on. You know, you got to recognize that there is an implicit bias, right? That's the first thing. But I think if you start to individualize stereotypes, actually take them head on, get to know a person, right? The more you get to know a person for who they are, I think it makes it a little bit easier for you to start removing that negative stereotype, right? You know, racism, stereotypes, those things are all taught, right? That's not just bred in us when we were born, right? Those things are taught. So how do you unlearn them? It's not easy to just unlearn them, but I think what you have to do is start to individualize them and really kind of take them head on and get to know a person. Let's take me, for example, right? My name's Deontay, right? That's an ethnic name, right? And you think about, I grew up on the west side of Chicago, not a great part of the Chicago area, right? To a single mom, right? Every statistic you can think of for myself and my brother, my mom has 2 kids, me and my older brother, was put against us. Somehow, you know, my mom, you know, as a single mom, still made sure that we went to private school. My mom, we're both attorneys, right, doing very well. You don't hear stories like that, right? You think of a single mom on a black single mother on the west side of Chicago raising 2 successful attorneys, that's unheard of, right? And so that's the thing. But when you get to know somebody like myself or my brother, right, you see our name or whatever the case may be, then when you take it on, right, you start to see, oh man, you know, what I always thought about, you know, a Black man or whatever the case may be, those things start to change, right? I'm an Evans scholar, right? I'm a James scholar. I have accomplished so many things in my life. We're both members of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, the first intercollegiate Black fraternity in the world. Dr. King, Thurgood Marshall, any prominent Black man you can think of are members of this fraternity. But it takes getting to know somebody to start effectuating and starting to change the narrative when it comes to those negative stereotypes and really kind of taking them out of your mind.
That's great. So I'm going to talk to your mom so I can get tips for my children. So that I know how to make sure I'm raising successful people, you know, little successful grandchildren. So I'll have to make sure I get in touch with her. But I want to make sure that we have keep check of our time. We have just a few more minutes, and I want to get to some of our questions. One of our questions for the panel: can you describe a gracious way for someone to ask an individual about their heritage, background, or identity? This is coming from Chad Watt, who I know, and he and I have this great conversation all the time. So I'm going to start with Deontay, since you're already up, go ahead.
Yeah, you know what? I'm a friendly guy. I think it's a case-by-case basis, but I'm a friendly guy. If you're, you know, just come up to me. I think it starts with kind of just after an introduction, you know, and we have had a moment to talk. And it's okay to say, hey, I want this to come off in the best way that I can. I hope that I'm not offending you by asking you this. But, tell me about your makeup or whatever the case may be, right? I think it's just how it's approached. If it comes with good intention, then I think that most people will receive it well.
Linda, how gracious way?
So for me, in conversation, right? So if I first meet somebody, we start talking, we get to a comfort level. I share a little bit about my background, right? My ethnicity, my gender preferences, where I'm from, where I've lived. And typically people will open up. And that's how I learn more about them. And sometimes people don't open up. And so I will respectfully, right, not expect them to share that until they're ready. That's just my approach.
Okay, Todd, how about you?
So I'm probably sort of like Linda as well. I generally am trying to ask right away. So, I may not ask the question right away. I'm kind of looking for some cues as well as to, I'll do like Linda as well, share a little bit about myself, kind of give them a sense that I'm comfortable and we're very open to the conversation and would be interested in hearing more about their background, identity, et cetera.
Anurag, how about you?
I think
how would people ask you about your heritage and background? Because the Canadian bit about you, that was something new for me.
Yeah, no, and that's actually that usually is the product of a lot of chuckles. But it's funny. What everyone said, absolutely, but it's also a little bit of the sincerity of the dialogue, right? Are you talking to me because you want to know me, right? Or are you talking to me, right, just because you want to get something out of it and you're on your way, right? I might not tell you anything about me. Right. One of those, you don't know me attitudes, and I'll put a wall up. Right. But if somebody's there and they're actually starting a sincere friendship, relationship, acquaintanceship, whatever you call it, but as Todd said, you also have to look for the cues, right?
Sam, same question for you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what all of our panelists have said so far. And Deontay, to your point, just showing the true intentions that you are trying to be genuine and you just want to learn more about this person. And just looking at the chat too, I know that Rez said something. She said, being kind transcends all this race-based identitarian deconstruction. And just to that point, kindness is one of the easiest things to show. And if you can prove to someone that you are genuinely a kind person, and the only reason that you want to get to know this person is so that you can just know them better, and that's it. There's no other real motivation. Then as long as you can convey that to them and respect that they may tell you their whole life story, or they may give you one or two words, and that's fine, and being content with that as well.
Aaron, how do you graciously, a gracious way to ask them about their heritage, their background, and their identity?
Just to echo what others have said, I think a lot of it's recognizing what they want you to know, and how open they are to divulging secrets. Or not secrets, but just private things about them. There are some people who want to have a very big wall up between their work self and their home self, and that's okay. And I think you have to respect that too. So, echoing back, I think it's just taking the cues, seeing what people want you to know. But if they give you, one clue, you can always, take that sort of down a trail. If they talked about growing up eating a certain kind of cuisine, you can say, oh, is that, was one of your parents, that, or why did you, why was that? Did you grow up there? You can find a lot of different ways just by being, authentically interested in them, and to Sam's point, being kind.
I want to thank each of our panelists for being a part of this conversation, but at the end of the day, what do you hope we will accomplish by having this conversation? And Aaron, since I see you on my screen, what do you hope we accomplish? You're representing iPride today.
Mm-hmm. I think, first and foremost, just helping people to understand what it means to be an ally and how they can take the first steps. I think secondly, giving people some food for thought for how they're interacting with their colleagues, and ways that they can help people out who might not be like them. If they see something that's not right, helping to fix it. Helping to advocate for underappreciated, thank you, groups. Those kinds of things.
Linda, what you represent iWin today, what do you hope will accomplish with conversations like this?
What I hope to accomplish with ongoing conversations like this is that we don't have to have them anymore. Right? We've got to evolve, and this is so necessary so that it's not necessary anymore, is my point. I would like us to get to that place where it's a non-issue.
Sam, same question for you. What do you hope we accomplish with this?
Yeah, I think it's just creating that and furthering that understanding that there are still inequalities that are very much relevant in today's world. And very, very well put, Linda. I think it's necessary that it does not have to be necessary anymore. But at the same time, too, to help us get to that point, I've just using myself as an example too. I remember feeling a little uncomfortable, not just because this is the very first time I've been on a panel like this, but also being on a panel with so many very important people in our company organization as well. But to really learn, and that was my biggest motivation to be on this, and I'm sure many of our attendees feel the same way. It's I may have a certain understanding, but how can I grow that? How can I put my best foot forward? How can I find a way to not just understand, but to actually act and stand as an ally with folks that really need it? So I think that would be what I hope to get out of the call.
Anurag, you're not necessarily representing an ERG today, but what do you hope everyone will take away from a conversation like this?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's the importance. I would love for everybody, myself included, to understand the importance of the learning journey. I started earlier talking about going from the macro, what you're watching and reading, and going to the micro, meaning as you walk through your life, understand those you're interacting with, and doing that learning journey. There's also a micro to macro. Well, once you get that understanding, you'll start noticing the systems that are in place, right? That encourage bias, right? And understanding how to tackle. Again, you can't tackle what you don't understand. So once you start understanding the systems out there, again, this company, many organizations, we're some of the parts. So the more of us that understand that there are systems of bias, institutions of bias, and we can learn and teach each other how we can tackle those systems. So I think the learning journey is something that's very important. And through it, and at the end of the day, at the macro, there's a lot of helpful resources. There's organizations, there are people outside of the organization that can help amplify what we want to do to tackle the institutional biases.
Okay. Deontay, I don't want to forget you, but someone is also asking you to share the reference to the book that you mentioned a little bit earlier. But what do you hope ultimately, coming from iBelieve, everyone will take away from this conversation?
Thanks, Shannon. I think this is kind of piggybacking off what Anurag just said. We have to first recognize that there is an issue. You can effectuate any change if you don't recognize that there is an issue, right? And that's the first step, right? And then, really just, this is kind of going to what Linda said, right? The more conversations we have, then it won't be necessary for us to have a conversation. But I think in the interim of that, the more conversations we have, the less people will be uncomfortable with having these conversations. And so a lot of times people won't have the conversation because they're uncomfortable to have the conversation. But understand that it's okay. This is the first step to making that change. If you don't know, if you don't get a different perspective, you can't change that. That's why iBelieve welcomes everybody. feel free to become a member, because it's so many different perspectives, and it's great to be able to get those different perspectives, because me as a Black man, I can't answer for the entire Black race. I can't answer for all Black men. There are many Black men who have different perspectives. So we have to start having so many more conversations, so that, just like Linda said, we won't have to have a conversation.
I agree. I want to thank all of my panelists. I think you all have brought great insight to everyone that has been listening today. There are a number of other questions, but we want to be thoughtful of everyone's time. Deontay, Linda,
Yes.
Aaron, Sam, Anurag, I think I caught everybody, everyone behind the scenes. Thank you so much. This is just part 2 in our series. So we have 2 more conversations that we're going to have, one in January of 2021, another coming up in February of 2021, which is also Black History Month. But I just want to remind everyone of something that each person on this panel said. Have a conversation and be okay sometimes that you just don't know. Also, remember, you can join any of these ERGs. You do have to be connected by VPN to get the information. But if you aren't in one of the ERGs, I strongly encourage you to take part in it. Linda, I will tell you, someone was on a different conversation with me and said, "Are you a part of iWin?" And I was like, "Oh, I am not." And she was like, "You really have to become part of iWin." So I will tell you. Todd, thank you for your time. The Multicultural ERG is pretty new, as well as the Young Employee Network. So again, get involved. We've got a few minutes left here, so I just want to thank you all. Great insight. Have a great day. I know here in the States, Halloween is tomorrow, but the most important thing I want to tell everyone is please, please, please stay safe. Okay?
Vote.
Oh, yes. If
Oh,
you
and
have not
vote.
voted, you are here in the
Vote,
States.
vote,
Please make
vote.
sure you vote if you have not voted, but please stay safe. Please mask up so that when our offices do open, that we can see each other again. Okay? Sandra, I am going to turn this back over to you to wrap things up a little bit.
Thank you, Shannon. I think you said it all. This was a wonderful panel discussion. We're getting a lot of great feedback from our chats. And again, please join an employee resource group. Please vote November 3rd if you haven't already. It's important. It's one of the most important elections. And I want to thank everyone for this conversation. We will continue Series 3, like Shannon talked about. And have a great weekend, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Hey, everyone. Have a good weekend. Happy Halloween.